Right, well, we will get started, and then as people join, they will jump in wherever we are. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name's Samantha, and I'm on the L&D team at GitLab. And this is our second live speaker series in a three-part series called What is Emotional Intelligence? And I'm really excited to welcome Reini Chipman to GitLab for this conversation. The title of today's conversation is called Diversity in Emotional Intelligence. So I'm really excited to have this conversation about EQ and really connect it to our values here at GitLab. If you aren't muted, if you could just mute yourself, please. Thank you. If you haven't been to one of these live speaker series before, the way that these go is in a second, I'm going to ask Reini to introduce themselves. Then we're going to move into a fireside chat conversation. So I have 3 questions prepared that Reini and I will go back and forth. And after we go through those 3 questions, we'll open it up to a Q&A format. So as we're talking, if you have questions for Reini, you can feel free to add them to the team member questions section at the very bottom of the agenda, and we'll get through as many as we can. I think that's all I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to pass it over to Reini for a quick introduction before we get started.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here and excited to talk about this topic. Give you a little bit of background on me. I guess I'm first and foremost a mom to a human and a rescue mutt. Those are 2 of the things I'm most proud of. And then in terms of work background, I have worked for quite some time in the human resources and people operations function. So worked in several tech organizations that were scaling and helped build up the people team and the culture and kind of build a great place to work. In fact, I many times have attempted to poach talent from GitLab. So if you cross paths with me in this capacity, hi again. Really honored to be here because GitLab has such an amazing reputation for attracting and developing great talent. And so it's awesome to be kind of shoulder to shoulder with you all today. So after sort of working in HR for quite some time, I decided to take a step back and get clear on what are the pieces that I love the most and energize me the most. And in doing that, I decided to start my own little boutique firm where I get to do executive coaching, some executive search, and then some leadership and organizational development. So that's what we do at Trove Collaborative, and you can visit our website to learn a little bit more. But the most recent thing that I've become involved in is I have joined a purpose-built venture studio as head of human capital. And this is a dream job for me. I basically get to go out into the world and talk with folks who might have, someone might need to mute. But anyway, I get to talk with folks whose dream it is to start a company and offer them an opportunity to work with our studio to have resources and coaching and support and capital to build a business. So excited about this new chapter, just got started this month, and you can learn more about Purpose Built on our link there.
Oh, thanks, Reini. I love when people are describing what they do and they use the word dream job. That's just like pretty awesome to hear. So thanks for sharing. Really happy to have you here at GitLab today.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll jump into this first question. So talking about, let alone the self-exploration of emotional intelligence can be scary, especially if it feels new. So I'm wondering, what are some ways that we can support ourselves and each other and approach emotional intelligence growth in an inclusive way?
Yeah, I love this question. So I have a lot of thoughts, particularly on this question. And I have some somewhat tactical ideas and recommendations that I'm going to share. But before I get into that, I think it's important to do some unpacking. So when I look at this question that we're talking about, we've got some big things in here. We've got the intersection of intelligence, right? Or wisdom or knowing, smarts. We've got growth, right? We're being asked to do something that might be new, that might be different, and inclusion, which is another huge topic. And all of these, intelligence, growth, and inclusion and diversity can be sensitive. They can be tender. They can require vulnerability. So what I thought might be helpful is to just take a little journey of unpacking a little bit how in many of our cultures, we're programmed from a really early age to do certain things, right? So, for example, many of us grew up in families or communities where we were encouraged to study hard, be smart, be right, right? Like get the right answer. Don't be wrong. Use your mind, use your brain. Hey, where are you going? Where are you going in life? Know where you're going. Have a clear line of sight, make linear progress. Let's get from point A to point B. So most of us grew up with this kind of programming, and we carry that forth into the workplace. But as I think about all of this, like, let's just take intelligence as an example. I think we're programmed really early on to be really analytical and use our mind. Where we get into with emotional intelligence is tapping into emotion and the heart, right? And there's a whole set of wisdom and knowing that we internally have as humans around that. So, we're moving from not just that, what's in our minds, what have we learned, our analytical skills, but tapping into the heart. We also know that there's a lot of wisdom in our bodies. And if you don't believe that, just don't listen to your body and let's see what happens. I've been at this for a long time, and I've experienced myself, and I've coached many leaders around what happens when we're not listening and trusting that body wisdom and doing what the body needs us to do to take care of ourselves and move forth. So for one, this whole notion of intelligence, we've had some programming, and there's lots of intelligence in different forms that we have that we get to tap into. Let's take progress as another area to unpack. At least in the US, our culture tends to be around linear progress, right? Let's map it out. Let's do a work back plan. What's in line here? And I don't know about you, but I think I look back on all my experiences now and I'm like, gosh, progress has very rarely been linear. So let's just keep in mind that sometimes going backwards can actually result a little bit in the momentum or the forward, the direction that we would like to go. Then there's this whole thing about being right. This is a big one, and this is really celebrated, especially in my experience in the corporate world and in tech organizations. Let's get to that right answer. Let's find what's right. And I think what I would love to unpack is, what about, like, how can we honor the role that failure plays in working together and building important things? How can we honor the role that fear plays, right? Like, and the unknown. I think my new sort of thing I'm looking at right now is the importance of and the role that the unknown plays in our lives. So, unpacking being right, thinking about what actually is important about the role of fear and the unknown and failure, and really thinking about, like, how can failure be our friend? How can fear be our friend? What does, like, good scary look like? So one of the things I always say is, if it's not a little bit scary, it's probably not worth me investing time in it, right? Like, it's probably not my big work. It's probably something someone else could do easily. If it's not a little scary, I don't know if I should even be doing it. So just want to throw that out there as an opportunity to unpack as we move into this conversation about three very deeply seated things in culture that can look different in different cultures and different families, but there certainly is a high level of programming involved around it. So let's go back just for a moment to GitLab's definition of emotional intelligence. So this is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. And this is sort of this tapping into the emotional side of work is new. 10 years ago, we didn't talk about politics at work. It just wasn't done. We didn't talk much about social justice or race or, so many of these topics. So tapping into the emotion, tapping into things like justice and impact that, historically underrepresented communities are having in the workplace it's a very new topic. And it is really exciting. I've been waiting 25 years for this, but it's also new. And with that comes, some bumbling around until we get it right. And at the same time, with all of this, we're asking in the HR world, we're saying, hey, we want to build a place where everybody can bring as much of their identity to work. Doesn't that sound great? And it does. But the challenge is it's not as safe for some people to do that as it is for others. So we have to keep that all in mind when we think about, again, emotional intelligence. How do we manage our own emotions and recognize and influence the emotions of those around you? At the same time that they're trying to figure out what pieces of myself can I even bring here safely? I have to suss that out. So one tip that I offer when you're thinking about inclusion in general, but certainly as it applies to how do we work together, how do we get to know each other, this little technique is called design for the margins. And if you think about, let's pretend I have a beautiful whiteboard here, and I'm going to draw a circle. And in the circle is dominant culture. So this is in any particular ecosystem, what the kind of prevailing culture is, right? So it can look different within different organizations, but let's see, in early stage tech companies, oftentimes the population tends to be younger. You find in early stage companies, there aren't as many parents. You find all sorts of things that sort of collect there. And then outside of that circle is what we call the margins, right? So people having aspects of their identity that are different than all the bits in this circle. I was in a early stage company once where dog owners were in the dominant culture, right? But parents were not. So there's all sorts of ways that you could potentially be living a little bit in the margins or way out in the margins. And it's a nice way to kind of think about diversity and inclusion. And this concept of design for the margins is important when you're thinking about how to be in conversation with people. And the way it works is, so just a quick little story. I believe it was after World War I or World War II. I don't remember which. I'm not a very strong history buff. But after one of the wars, soldiers were coming back and they were injured and they were in wheelchairs. And the government sort of looked at this is a big problem. We need a better way for these people to get around. And so they started working on creating ramps at the end of sidewalks. And there was a lot of pushback, like, this is going to be expensive. We don't need to do this. Like, why are we doing this? And they decided to go ahead and institute a policy where at the end of sidewalks going into an intersection, you have these ramps, right? Well, what they found when they designed for these folks in the margins who were injured and in wheelchairs and disabled is that it actually wasn't more expensive. And they also found that all sorts of people really valued that. People wearing high-heeled shoes, people pushing strollers, all really benefited from this design that was intentionally done for someone way out in the margin so that they could access and participate. So, one thing I would offer is, think about in your group or in your conversations, when you're crafting a meeting or a conversation or a project, like how can we think about how to make sure that everyone can access? And let's take a leap of faith and trust that if we design that way, that actually everyone is going to win. So that's one tip that I throw out. I think it's a really fun tool. There's also ways to play with it. And I'd be happy to chat with anybody later after it to share more about how to use it. And then I have this other kind of tips that I put together for us to go through that I think are really helpful when you're thinking about doing something new and moving forward in your own learning and development journey and trying to build your emotional intelligence and grow as a leader. So I'll walk us through these tips. All right, so first one is relax. So let's all just close our eyes and just take 2 really big breaths. All right, feel free to move your neck around if you need to. So the first thing I want to say about relaxing is we can all just take a deep breath, because the research out there shows that as humans, we're kind of wrong all the time anyway. So the idea of embracing being wrong is really freeing. And you could think of it more as like, how do we work together to get it right or get to the best answer right now versus I individually have to be right. So there's a book I read on this. It's called Being Wrong: Adventures in the Margin of Error. And I'll put this in the notes after our call. It's by Catherine Schultz. And her argument is that error is the fundamental human condition and should be celebrated as such. So it's a really fun contrast to that early programming around being right. And I think it's also just an opportunity to give ourselves a little grace when it comes to, this, I have to be good at emotional intelligence. I have to be the best at this. Like, just take a break. And, if you're committed to doing it, you'll get there. But also realize, like, you're going to be wrong and you're going to learn new things and you're going to change your mind over and over again. All right, so step 2 in my newly concocted framework here is to reflect. So once we sort of give ourselves a break, take a breath, let's reflect. As we said before, there's a lot of different kinds of intelligence. There's analytical wisdom, there's book smarts, there's being good at music, there's wisdom in our hearts, there's wisdom in our body. And we can ask for feedback to better understand which of these are really, really strong at and where is our growth edge. So we can also work on being really, really good at receiving feedback. So one of the things I run into with a lot of leaders is they'll say, I want to get better at giving feedback, right? And when you're thinking about emotional intelligence and inclusion, like, oftentimes that boils down to a conversation that needs to happen, right? Like, I'm not sure how to approach this conversation. I want to make sure I'm being really thoughtful and really kind of holistic about giving this feedback. I agree giving feedback is really important, but I would actually argue that receiving feedback and being really, really good at it is almost more important. Because if you start to build a reputation that people can come to you and share hard stuff, and you're going to listen really thoughtfully and be grateful for the data, you'll just find that more and more people trust and come, and you're getting just more and more rich data. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree. Being good at feedback doesn't mean agreeing with it. Probably 80% of feedback's wrong. But it doesn't mean that it's not important for that person to share it or for you to receive that data, right? So think about, how do you get really good at receiving feedback, integrating what resonates into your development plan or your own personal desire to grow, and then have those necessary conversations around it. So that reflection of thinking about where you're strong, where do you want to grow, and receiving feedback in support of that growth is really important. All right, so then I'm going to suggest a release process. So I'm going to invite you to do this with me. Just take 10 seconds and think about your biggest, most epic fail at work. The thing you messed up so bad. Okay, everybody take 10 seconds. Okay, you might have some perspective floating around about that thing that happened, that situation. Let's flip it a little bit. When you look back on that, how did it get you to where you are now? How did it serve you in your learning and growth journey? Take 10 seconds and think about that. Okay, good. I hope you felt a little shift. So now you can pick a perspective to hold moving forward. That's the thing about us humans, is we get to make it up all the time. So we can literally decide to choose a new perspective. So let's all pick one. Just pick a word or two words that it's like, okay, moving forward, this is how I'm going to hold perspective on that situation. Great. And so now you just did an integration. You accepted information, you integrated it into your learning. And now anything that was like dark, shame, whatever you're feeling around that, you can let it go. Light a candle, burn some incense, whatever you want to do your ritual, go for a run and let it go. All right, next step is to reset. So now that we've let all that go, let's take 10 seconds. And again, we're thinking about emotional intelligence here, right? So any kind of experience that touches up around what you feel like you are now almost ready to learn. So now that you've let go, reflect on, what are you almost ready to learn in the realm of emotional intelligence or leadership? What are you almost ready to learn? Good. So you've got your thing, and now you can hit refresh. You've got your thing, you're ready to move forward. So you can do a couple of things. You could think about, who would you like to enroll in supporting you in this next chapter of learning? Or what is a new perspective that you'll choose to support yourself in that journey, right? What is your path forward? This is your chance to just lock that in, set an intention around what's new that you're almost ready to learn. So this is just a really simple process. When things get bumpy, whether it's tied to emotional intelligence, your leadership journey, your learning and development plan, having conversations that support inclusion are hard. And I had a mentor tell me once, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, if you're feeling awkward and uncomfortable, that means you're probably doing it right. So to do this work well necessitates discomfort and necessitates awkwardness. And so having some little practice like this to support, taking what is important, reframing perspective, letting go, resetting on that next learning edge, even if it feels like a step backwards, right? Because we've already decided that progress doesn't have to be linear, but it's your journey, and it can be whatever sort of shape or direction or cadence that makes sense for you. So that was a really long stream of consciousness on the first question, intentionally so, because I think there was a lot of juice in that one.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Reini. Thank you. So many great tips that we've been writing down in the agenda. And I think that there's just so many connections to the way that we work at GitLab, and the kind of expectation that it's okay to fail here, and to that idea that progress isn't always linear. That really makes me think of iteration, because by taking iteration, your progress can move in such a different way than you originally thought. And I really just love being able to apply those values to the way that we think about our own growth in emotional intelligence. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for connecting that. And I think It's always interesting in an organization because it's like this tension point of supporting innovation and creativity and failure. And then also we also have to perform and we want to make sure we're really clear about what good looks like in performance, and that the definition of performance involves some sort of work around iteration and failure, that's part of it. That's part of what good looks like.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Thanks for that. So I'll move on to the second question. You might have already touched on some responses, so if we need to move on to the third one, just let me know and we'll move on. But the second one is, how can we observe, ask, and understand how emotional intelligence shows itself differently across a range of identities? And like with identities, I'm thinking like how people show up differently based on their culture, their ability, their gender, their role at GitLab.
Yeah, I think I have a pretty short response on this one. So at the end of the day, I think the ability to be a really good listener and understand sort of how things are impacting others is arguably the most important leadership capability there is. Not only that, I think it's also a secret to a successful life. And emotions and the management of emotions show up differently in different cultures and identities and types of roles. So I'm going to take us back to that design for the margins exercise, right? So when you're trying to understand how this shows itself with people who are different, and thank goodness that they are, right? Because you can't have creativity without it. But when you find yourself in that situation, go back to that mapping and think about folks, are they fully in that dominant culture bucket, or is there an aspect of their identity that because you likely don't know them all the way, and map that out, and think about if there's a way to design for that. Another way I like to think about that is, the more marginalized someone has lived in different communities, probably the more they know, because guess what? They've probably struggled the most, and they've had probably the richest journey in many ways. So, there's a lot of really key insights that we can learn from folks who have been living and experiencing the world in the margins. Couple of quick ones, I would say, stay curious. I'm sure that's part of your culture and the framework. Keep listening, keep honing your listening and feedback skills. If there's one thing that makes leaders successful, it's social skills. It's being with people, right? Become excellent at navigating the failures and mistakes. And then here's two extra tips that people often forget. Number one, ask for help. Show your vulnerability, honor someone with an ask for help, showing them that you think they have something in their superpowers that will help you get to where you want to go. And the final one is, don't forget to celebrate your wins, big and small, right? If there's a conversation you're terrified to have, or a conflict you just couldn't resolve, and you get through it and you find the light, celebrate it, even if it's a teeny tiny little thing. So don't forget to celebrate your wins, big and small.
Great. Thanks, Reini. So I have one more question, and I'm just going to throw out a reminder to anyone on the call. If you have questions that you want to ask after this last one, you can feel free to add them to the bottom of the agenda. I think I've pushed down to like the third page, so you're going to have to scroll to the bottom. But yeah, feel free to add them there and we'll go into those next. So my last question is, and you really have already done this a lot already, but I want to know what else you have to share too. So can you talk a bit about the practical application of this approach towards emotional intelligence and how it can influence personal and team results?
Yeah, I have a quick story. So I once joined an organization in part because empathy was one of their core values. And I think empathy really supports our ability to be strong in terms of our emotional intelligence, right? When we think about that definition, to understand and manage your own emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. You can't do that without empathy for yourself, empathy for others. So I joined this organization because they had chosen empathy as one of their 4 core values. And my role in an organization in the past has been to nurture the ecosystem so that the right conditions exist to support performance across the organization, right? So you were talking about personal and team results, and what I'm calling out here is like, my job is to ensure the whole organization is performing. And my definition of performance, or one of them, is performance is working through and with people to achieve the best results. All right, so right there, you just said you got to work through and with people to get the best results. So we stop and think about it. Okay, empathy supports emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence supports performance, right? Easy peasy. Well, we had a new executive join the organization, and a few months after they started, we were in a meeting and they said, hey, I'm just not aligned with this value around empathy. It just slows us down and it's just going to kill our performance. It's negatively affecting performance. And I just sort of, I was like, wait, what? You joined, you said you were in, like, so that's a little bit of an integrity thing, which was weird. But then, I took a step back and just thought, wow, okay, what do we do here? Because this is a CFO, and they held a lot of power, right? So they held a lot of power. They came in and and they were a member of the dominant culture, and really did lack empathy and lacked awareness around how their leadership impacted the organization. So I sort of went to bat and advocated for the value of empathy, and advocated for us to continue to build our culture in support of this value and leveraging this value. And I lost that battle. And at the end of the day, this person held a belief that empathy did not support performance. And we know from Stephen Covey that beliefs drive behaviors and behaviors drive results. So the result was that the organization is no longer in business. And I would argue that that was a pretty strong impact on the spiral that this organization experienced. Yeah, so it's pretty profound example, but pretty straightforward also.
Mm-hmm. Can you repeat what you just said? You said belief drives one, and then I missed the other two.
Yeah, so there's there's like a little diagram. I think it was Stephen Covey who articulated that, a lot of times in the workplace, we think about performance, we think about results, and we might have ways to improve them that aren't effective. Like we change things, but we change our behavior, but we're not getting the right result. So his argument is that your beliefs, the way you see things, the way you see the world, your belief set is going to impact your behaviors, and then those behaviors affect your results. So in order to get the best results or change results dramatically, sometimes it's not just about a behavior change. Usually it's about looking at a belief and reshaping a belief. Mm. So I don't know if that made it more simple or more complex, but
no, that's great. Because I think like even just like from an L&D perspective that I have, we often talk about behavior change to change results. But I really like this idea that in many cases, it's more than a behavior change and it's more of a belief change. And I feel like I could even apply that to the way that I work on my own emotional intelligence, and like recognizing that there are maybe some like beliefs that I hold really strong that are causing me to reach results or perform in a way that I am unhappy with. And so like, yeah, I don't know, it just reminds you that you kind of have to like pick your own beliefs every so often and let go of what doesn't serve you anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really examine them and be open to new data coming in that supports the change in the belief, right? Yeah. Like, oh, I was wrong about that. This is what I believe now. Until I get better data.
I'm reading a book right now that I think really connects to this conversation that people on the call might like. It's called Think Again, and it's by Adam Grant. I actually, if you don't want to read the book, if you listen to Hidden Brain, they did like a podcast series called You 2.0, and there's like, an hour conversation with Adam Grant that maybe you don't have to read the book if you listen to the podcast. But it's all about what you were just saying, Reini, about being like open to new data and then being willing to let that new information change your beliefs, rather than holding on to old beliefs that, might have been proven wrong by the data that you were presented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And building on that, love the connection to Adam Grant. That's such a nice compliment. But building on that too, let's remember the way to get new data is to be great at accepting feedback. And the way to build trust, particularly from those who are not as safe and taking risks to tell you more about who they are, is to be really thoughtful and really listening and building those bridges of trust that you are someone that's safe to come to and to open up to about your identity, about your preferences, about what you need. So I still think it kind of gets back to those. Yeah. So thinking about your belief structure, thinking about what is it like for someone to come and give me data. Yeah. And how am I integrating that and taking what resonates, right? Again, I do not believe that all feedback is relevant or important, but maybe 10% of it is. So take that little nugget and see what you can do with it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm looking at the agenda and I don't see any questions in there, but I'll ask on the call in case anyone wants to just voice one before we wrap up. Okay. And if not, if you come up with a question later on and you want to add it into the document, I can help relay that message back to Reini and, get you an answer if maybe you spend the day thinking about this topic.
Yeah. And I'll just add, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me through the Trove website. If you want to have a one-on-one conversation or need support that's not in a group environment, I'm here for it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Reini, for being here. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you and to bring your perspective to the rest of our team. And also thank you to all the GitLab team members on the call who made time to be part of this conversation. I really appreciate everyone here. So hope you all have a great rest of your day.
You
Yeah.
too. Take care. Bye-bye.